Brain imaging has been instrumental in aiding our understanding of the brain, both in terms of its structure and function. While there are numerous methods, we'll be covering 4 commonly used imaging techniques in this video. One method is functional magnetic resonance imaging. How does MRI work? Protons are found throughout the body, with individual spins and alignment. A magnetic field produced by the machine causes protons to align with the field. A radiofrequency current then disrupts the protons, forcing them out of equilibrium. When the radio current is turned off, the protons realign and return to equilibrium, releasing energy in the process. The amount of energy and the rate at which protons realign depends on the environment and chemical nature of the molecules the protons are in. MRI machines detect these differences to produce images that can differentiate structures in the body. fMRI is a particular type of MRI. Red blood cells carrying oxygenated hemoglobin realign in a magnetic field at a different rate than deoxygenated blood, a difference dubbed the blood oxygen level dependent contrast, or BOLD. When neural activity occurs, oxygen-rich blood flows to the area to provide energy. Because it can measure oxygenation differences, fMRI uses changes in oxygen-rich blood flow as a proxy for brain activity. The results can be displayed on activation maps, which pinpoint which portions of the brain are active. fMRI is used to help identify important language and movement control areas for brain surgery patients and assess potential damage from head injuries or brain disorders. fMRI is advantageous because it produces images with high spatial resolution non-invasively. However, because it is using oxygen levels as a proxy for brain activity, temporal resolution is relatively poor compared to other methods of brain imaging.
I will now be talking about CT scans. A CT scan, formerly known as a computed tomography scan, is a medical scanning procedure that uses compiled X-ray measurements that were taken from different angles. This non-invasive procedure produces cross-sectional images of specific areas of the body by using X-ray beams that cross the body in an axial plane. A CT scan procedure typically starts with patients receiving a contrasting agent, typically made out of iodine or barium sulfate, in order to make images clear. The patient lies on a bed that slowly moves through the gantry, which is the ring cylinder where the patient is placed. The X-ray rotates around the patient while shooting narrow beams of X-ray through the body, producing axial scans. A typical scan takes 15 to 30 minutes. Looking at the pros of CT scans, an obvious one is its comprehensiveness. CT scans are capable of recording scans of blood vessels, bones, tumors, and so much more. The image of a CT scan done shows a tibial fracture in detail. Its diagnostic capabilities allow CT scans to find and make evaluations on a patient's health without being invasive the way surgical biopsies are. Now, looking at the cons, CT scans are always avoided during pregnancies, so they are not available for this demographic. Another con is that there is a concern in regard to the exposure of high-level radiation, which could potentially be a risk of cancer. Looking at the table from the Department of Radiology at UCSF evaluating the risks, though the chances of developing a fatal cancer are fairly low, it is still possible.
EEG, or electroencephalography, is a brain imaging technique used to directly measure the brain's electrical activity. EEG is commonly used to diagnose different brain conditions such as epilepsy, brain tumors, migraines, head injuries like strokes, dizziness, or sleep problems. It may also be used to confirm brain death. When having an EEG performed, a hood of electrodes is placed directly on the patient's head. These electrodes are made up of metal discs with wires that are used to detect electrical charges in brain activity. More specifically, EEG shows changes in charge separation and movement of charged particles. An EEG machine amplifies and records signals as wave patterns, producing a reading like this one. EEG can help diagnose different conditions because it can detect abnormal brain waves to inform where abnormal activity is focalized. EEG is advantageous because it directly measures the brain, allowing for a strong analysis of size and timing in response to stimuli. However, EEG measures groups of neurons instead of single neurons, making it difficult to pinpoint a specific location of activity. An example of EEG before, during, and after a seizure can be seen here. The EEG reading during the seizure shows much larger brain waves than either before or after, which makes sense since a seizure is an electrical disturbance in the brain. EEG is one brain imaging technique that is useful for everyday applications and can help diagnose a multitude of problems.
In the final part of the video, I will discuss PET scans. So how does positron emission tomography work? To start, a molecule similar to naturally occurring ligands is injected, inhaled, or digested by the patient. These tracers contain a radioactive nucleus that decays and emits an antimatter equivalent called a positron. This positron immediately seeks out an electron, and when they meet, they annihilate each other. This causes gamma rays to emit in opposite directions. So, when a patient is taken to receive a PET scan, these gamma rays are then detected by the gamma ray detectors located inside the machine and graphed according to their point of origin. This graph can then be used to show both a heat map projection of the abundance of the tracers, as well as be combined with an MRI or CT scan to show spatial relationships. So why do we use PET scans? First, they can detect chemical activities that are specific to the tracer. And, as I said before, they are typically combined with an MRI or CT scan to show metabolic events in relation to internal structures. Last, they provide a non-invasive method of detecting many internal diseases. Finally, there are distinct pros and cons associated with PET scans. First, PET scans provide doctors and radiologists with diagnostic precision needed for treatment. And as I said before, it is a non-invasive method for diagnostics. Finally, the scan is relatively quick, lasting only about 30 minutes. The cons, however, include the exposure to radiation, which prevents pregnant or breastfeeding mothers from receiving the scan, risks associated with glucose tracers in diabetic patients, as well as, although rare, potential allergic reactions to the tracer.